My sister-in-law stood at the head of the dining room table, smiled at me like I was a child who had asked a question above my pay grade, and said, "Grandma already told us you weren't getting the house. She changed her mind before she passed." "I'm sorry, Claire, but that's just the truth." I looked down at my coffee cup. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded slowly, the way you nod when someone hands you a story you already know is a lie. Because 2 weeks earlier, sitting beside my grandmother's hospice bed at 2 a.m, she had pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand and whispered, "Don't let them touch the house." I already made sure. Find Richard. I hadn't told a single person about that piece of paper, and I hadn't told anyone about Richard yet either. But they were about to find out. My grandmother, Dorothy, was not a soft woman. She was the kind of woman who raised 4 children on a school librarian's salary after my grandfather walked out, who paid off a 30-year mortgage 9 years early, who drove the same Buick for 22 years because it still ran fine, and she saw no reason to be foolish with money. She was 81 years old when the fall happened, a Tuesday morning in her kitchen, a wet floor and a moment of bad luck, and after that everything moved fast and then terribly slow all at once. I was 29 when I got the call. I was living 40 minutes away, working as a pediatric nurse, and I was the one who drove to the hospital that night while my brother and his wife were at a dinner party and said they'd come in the morning. I sat in the plastic chair beside her bed while they reset the monitors, and when she opened her eyes and saw me, she said, "I knew it would be you." That was how it started. And that was how it continued for the next 14 months. My brother, who I'll call by his role because that's what he had become to me by the end, my older brother, is 4 years my senior and has always been the one our parents photographed more, praised more, worried about more. Not out of cruelty, just out of habit. He was the first everything first grandchild, first college graduate, first to get married. His wife entered the family 8 years ago with a talent for interior design and an even sharper talent for knowing the value of things before anyone else did. She cataloged every antique in my grandmother's house with her eyes before she ever asked a single question out loud. I noticed it. My grandmother noticed it too. After the fall, my brother came on weekends. His wife came occasionally, and when she did, she walked through the rooms with a particular kind of attention, touching frames, turning over ceramic pieces to check the stamps on the bottom. My grandmother watched her do it and said nothing. She just watched. I came every other day, then every day. Then I moved my overnight bag into the back bedroom because the visiting nurse could only do mornings and my grandmother was afraid at night. I learned which medications had to be taken with food and which ones made her dizzy. I learned that she needed the television on low for company, but that she hated the news, so we watched old game show reruns until 11. I learned that when she said she was fine, she usually wasn't, and when she was actually struggling, she went quiet in a particular way that I could only recognize because I had spent enough hours in that house to understand her silences. My brother called twice a week. His wife sent flowers once, for her birthday. They came at Thanksgiving and Christmas and made noise about how wonderful everything looked, and how capable I was, and how lucky Grandma was to have me. Nobody used the word sacrifice. Nobody said, "We should take a week so you can rest." I stopped waiting for it after month 4. In the lucid stretches, my grandmother and I talked the way you can only talk with someone when the pretense of normal life has been stripped away, and all that's left is honesty. She told me about her marriage, about money she had hidden from my grandfather in a coffee tin in the garage because she knew she'd need it someday. She told me that she had updated her will 3 years before the fall, while she was still sharp and healthy, and that her attorney, a man named Richard Hale who had handled her affairs for over a decade, had everything in order. The house, the savings account, the contents, all of it laid out clearly. "You're in there, Claire," she told me one evening while I was brushing her hair. "More than in there, I want you to have the house. I want you to have a place that's yours, and that no one can take." She said it plainly, the way she said everything. Not emotional, just factual. This is how it is. She also said something else, something I turned over in my mind for months afterward. "They're going to try," she said. "After I'm gone, they're going to try something. I know them. So I want you to call Richard the same day. Don't wait. Same day, Claire. I promised her I would. She passed on a Wednesday morning in March, just after sunrise. I was there. My brother arrived 40 minutes later. His wife arrived with him, dressed in a dark blazer, as though she had already known it was that kind of morning. The 2 weeks that followed were the kind of exhausted blur that anyone who has lost someone close will recognize: the paperwork, the calls, the arrangements, the strange domestic tasks that accumulate around a death like sediment. I handled most of it. I was already there, already inside the rhythm of that house, and it felt wrong to stop. My brother and his wife came over several times. They were helpful in certain ways. His wife organized the pantry, which nobody had asked her to do. She also quietly relocated a rosewood jewelry box from my grandmother's dresser to her own tote bag on the second visit, which I noticed and did not yet address. The official gathering happened on a Sunday, 16 days after the funeral. My brother had invited his wife's parents, 2 cousins I barely knew, and my own parents, who had flown in from Arizona. The stated purpose was to start thinking about next steps for the house. No one had called Richard Hale yet. Or so they assumed. I had called Richard Hale on the afternoon of the day my grandmother died. He had answered on the second ring and said, "I've been waiting for your call, Claire. Dorothy told me you would be the one to reach out. We need to meet, but not yet. Sit tight. When the time comes, I'll be there." I had not told anyone about that conversation. I sat with it the way my grandmother had taught me to sit with important things quietly, patiently, while I observed. So, when I walked into that Sunday gathering, and my sister-in-law stood at the head of the table where my grandmother used to eat breakfast, and said that Dorothy had changed her mind about the house, that she had expressed her wishes clearly before she died, and that those wishes were for the house to be sold, and the proceeds split evenly among the family, I was already prepared for it. I had been prepared for it since March. I just hadn't expected her to be so confident about it, so settled in her version of events, so completely unaware of what I had sitting in my jacket pocket. My brother nodded along while she talked. He had a tendency to do that, to let her lead and follow just a beat behind, as though her certainty was something he borrowed when his own ran low. My parents looked uncomfortable, the way people look when they sense a current beneath the surface of a conversation but don't know which way it's running. The cousins were checking their phones. She told me personally, my sister-in-law continued, we had a very meaningful conversation about it in January. She understood that selling made more financial sense than leaving it to one person. She said she didn't want to cause division. She looked at me with something that was engineered to look like compassion. I know this isn't what you were expecting, Claire, but Grandma wanted what was best for everyone. My grandmother, in January, had been on a new pain management protocol that left her sleeping 14 hours a day and confused about the day of the week when she was awake. I had been there in January. I knew exactly what she had and hadn't been capable of expressing. That's interesting, I said. I kept my voice even, because I have something here I'd like everyone to see. I reached into my jacket and placed the folded piece of paper on the table. My grandmother had written on it in her careful librarian's hand, in the blue fountain pen she kept on her nightstand, several weeks before January. It was not a legal document. It was a note. It said, "Claire knows to call Richard. Everything is already done. Do not let them confuse you." It was dated, signed, and witnessed by the visiting nurse, whose name and phone number were written at the bottom. The room went quiet in a very particular way. My sister-in-law's eyes moved from the paper to my face. "That doesn't mean anything legally," she said, but her voice had changed. The warmth had drained out of it. "You're right," I said. "It doesn't, but this does." I had texted Richard from the car before I walked in. The front door opened. Richard Hale was 67 years old, with white hair and the unhurried bearing of a man who had spent 4 decades watching people underestimate the importance of paperwork. He carried a worn leather document case, and he walked into that dining room like he had been expected, because he had been. "Good afternoon," he said. "I apologize for the hour. Dorothy asked me to make myself available when her granddaughter needed me, and I take client instructions seriously, even posthumously." He looked at my sister-in-law without particular expression. "You must be Nathan's wife. Dorothy mentioned you." He did not elaborate on what she had mentioned. He set his document case on the table and opened it. My grandmother had executed a revised will 4 years ago, current, properly witnessed, and filed with the county. The house went to me, along with its contents and the savings account that held a little under $90,000, the product of 40 years of careful, stubborn, unglamorous saving. A smaller amount was designated for my brother, structured as a cash bequest. A note in the file, which Richard read aloud at my grandmother's instruction, stated plainly that she was aware of the disparity and that it reflected her knowledge of who had been present. My brother stared at the table while Richard read. His wife sat very still, but that was only the first document. Richard placed a second folder on the table. He looked at me. I gave him the same kind of nod I imagined my grandmother would have given, small, certain. He slid the folder across to my brother. "This is a matter Dorothy asked me to address separately," Richard said. "She kept meticulous records. She was a librarian for 38 years. He allowed himself a small pause. In 2019, Nathan and his wife approached Dorothy for a loan of $35,000 to cover a down payment shortfall on their current home. Dorothy provided the funds. There is a signed promissory note in that folder. The loan has not been repaid." He opened the second folder and pointed to the relevant line. "There is also a separate transaction in 2021, another $18,000 described at the time as a personal loan, also undocumented, until Dorothy came to me and asked me to construct a paper trail retroactively based on her own records." He looked at my brother. "The total outstanding with interest, as of today, is $61,000. The cousins were no longer on their phones. My brother looked up. She said, those were gifts. She wrote the word loan in her household ledger 37 times, Richard said pleasantly. She was very precise about language. My sister-in-law's composure, the thing she had built and maintained and worn into that room like a piece of expensive clothing, began to come apart in small, visible increments. Her jaw tightened. Her hands, folded on the table, pressed against each other. "This is Nathan. This is not what she told us," she said. "She said whatever she said to you privately," I told her. "But what she put on paper is what she meant. You clearly manipulated her," my sister-in-law said, her voice dropping into something cold and direct, the voice that had always been underneath the warmth. "You were alone with her for over a year. You isolated her. You convinced a sick, confused woman to." "My grandmother was not confused," I said. "I was there. I was there every single day. I know exactly what she understood and what she didn't, and I know what month her cognition was compromised and what month it was perfectly intact, because I have 14 months of nursing notes in a binder in my car that I kept because I am a nurse, and that is what I do." I let that settle. I also have her journals. She kept one every day of her life until 6 weeks before she died. You are welcome to read what she wrote about January. My sister-in-law went quiet. My brother had not looked up from the table in several minutes. Richard produced one more page. This one he handed to me directly, and I placed it in the center of the table where everyone could see it. It was a letter, handwritten by my grandmother, addressed to no one in particular, clearly intended as a record. In it, she described a visit in January, during which my sister-in-law had brought papers and asked her to sign them. My grandmother had written that she had pretended to be more confused than she was, a performance she noted with some satisfaction, and had signed nothing. She had, however, called Richard the following morning and described the visit in detail. His notes from that phone call were attached. "She wasn't confused," I said quietly. "She was watching. She had been watching for a long time." My mother made a sound from the corner of the room. My father put his hand over hers. My sister-in-law stood up. "This is insane. Nathan, say something. We are not sitting here and letting her—" "Sit down." My brother's voice was quiet. It was the most he had said all afternoon, and it stopped her. She sat down. He looked at Richard. "The loan," he said. "The $61,000. What happens with it?" "It is considered an advance against your bequest," Richard said. "The amount of your inheritance under the will is structured to offset it, which means effectively you receive nothing in cash from the estate, Nathan, but you are also cleared of the debt." He paused. Dorothy was precise, but she was also fair. My brother nodded once, slowly, the way a person nods when they are absorbing something they suspected was coming, but had hoped wouldn't. He looked at me for the first time that afternoon. He looked older than I had ever seen him look, older than when our dog died when we were children, older than at the funeral. "I didn't know about the papers in January," he said. "I want you to know that." I looked at him for a long moment. I believed him. That was the hardest part. Actually, not the confrontation, not the documents, not the look on my sister-in-law's face, but the fact that my brother had spent years letting someone else do his seeing for him and was only now understanding the cost of that. "I know," I said. His wife stood up again. She gathered her bag with the deliberate precision of someone who is keeping themselves together through pure force of will. "This isn't over," she said to me. "It actually is," Richard said mildly. "The will is filed, the estate is in probate, and everything is in order. If you wish to contest, you are welcome to retain an attorney. I'd be happy to recommend several who specialize in estate litigation, so you can get a realistic sense of your odds." He closed his document case with a soft click. Dorothy expected this outcome as well. She was, as I mentioned, precise. They left. My sister-in-law walked through the door without looking at my brother first, which I thought said everything. He followed after a moment, pausing in the doorway. "She kept records," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "She kept everything," I told him. "She was a librarian." He left. My parents stayed. My mother helped me make coffee. We sat at my grandmother's table in the quiet that comes after something has broken, the kind of quiet that is not empty but full of all the things that have shifted and settled and cannot be put back in the previous arrangement. My father, who is not a man of many words, said, "Your grandmother knew what she was doing." It was the most useful thing anyone had said all day. The weeks that followed were not simple. My sister-in-law did contact an attorney, and there was a brief, unpleasant exchange of letters. Richard handled it without drama. The challenge went nowhere. The nursing notes and journals and the record of the January visit constituted what Richard described as a very sturdy wall, and after about 6 weeks, the letters stopped. My brother called me in the middle of that period, on a Thursday night. I almost didn't answer. I did anyway. He didn't apologize immediately, which actually made me trust what he said more. He started by asking about the house, practical questions about probate timelines, and then he went quiet for a moment and said, "She left me a letter too." Richard gave it to me at the end. I didn't say anything because I needed to read it about 15 times first. He paused again. "She wasn't angry at me. That was harder, somehow. She just said she hoped I'd figure out the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you can do for them." I didn't know what to say to that. "I'm figuring it out," he said. "It's taking a while." I told him that I thought some things were worth taking a while with. We didn't become close overnight. That's not how it works. But we began the slow, tentative work of talking to each other again, without anyone else's voice running underneath the conversation. The house transferred to my name in late summer. I drove over the afternoon it was official and sat in the driveway for a while before I went in. It was a white clapboard house with a screened porch and a garden that had gotten overgrown during the difficult months at the end, and it needed new gutters, and the kitchen floor was warped in one corner, and I had never in my life owned anything with a roof before. I sat in the driveway and felt the weight of it, the specific gravity of something that had been held in place for you by someone who loved you before you even knew you needed it held. I walked through the room slowly. Everything was where it had always been. The books were still on the shelves in the order my grandmother had arranged them, which was not alphabetical, and not by genre, but by some internal logic that had made sense only to her and that I had slowly learned to read over 14 months. The fountain pen was still on the nightstand. The old Buick was still in the garage. I found the coffee tin in the back of the kitchen cabinet, where she had told me it would be. There was no money in it anymore, that had all been moved into proper accounts decades ago, but she had left something in it. A small index card, in her handwriting, that said, "A house is just walls and a roof. Home is the person who doesn't leave. You didn't leave. This is yours." I put it on the shelf next to her fountain pen. I did not buy anything flashy or expensive. I repaired the gutters. I fixed the kitchen floor. I planted the garden back to something manageable. Nothing formal, just the hardy, no-fuss perennials my grandmother had always preferred, the ones that could take a hard winter and come back anyway. I also, after a conversation with Richard, made sure my own affairs were properly documented. I had a will drawn up. I set up a small trust for my own protection. I kept records, the way she had taught me to keep records, not out of suspicion, but out of the understanding that clarity is a form of kindness to the people you love, and a form of protection against the ones you can't fully trust. My brother came over in September with coffee and no agenda. We sat on the screened porch, which still smelled faintly of the particular soap my grandmother used to clean it, and we talked for 3 hours. He had moved out of the house he shared with his wife. He didn't say much about it, and I didn't press. Some things are still being figured out, and the figuring requires space. We watched the light go down behind the neighbor's oak tree, the way we used to watch things when we were kids. Not talking about the thing we were watching, just being in the same place at the same time, which is its own kind of language. Before he left, he stood on the porch steps and said, "She would have liked knowing you were here, in the house." He said it plainly, not sentimentally, the way she would have said it herself. "I know," I said. He nodded and walked to his car. I stood there on the porch my grandmother had built in 1987, in the blue hour, when the light turns soft and everything looks like a photograph of itself, and I thought about what she had given me. Not just the house, not just the savings, not just the legal architecture she had quietly constructed to protect what was mine, but the education of watching someone who knew exactly who she was and exactly what she had built and refused, right up until the end, to pretend otherwise. She had kept records. She had told me to call Richard. She had written it down. Some people protect you with their bodies. She protected me with documentation. And in the end, it was more than enough. I went inside and made tea, Earl Grey, strong, the way she liked it, and sat at her table in my house, and let the quiet be what it was, not empty, not sad, but full of everything that stays.